Go ahead, boss.
नमस्ते गवर्नर जी, मैं आपको पुणे में मिला था।
जी नमस्ते।
मेरा नाम रवि कुमार है, मैं आपको पुणे में अभी मिला था।
Okay. Okay. Boss ji, you can go.
We'll start, yeah? Good afternoon and good evening, everybody. And welcome today to our session on the dialogue on democracy, the politics of the future. We are living in very interesting times where the importance of social media has now become very important for digital democracy. In one way, digital democracy has made governance more accountable. Social media has made governance more transparent, more inclusive. In another way, we've started living in a world of fake news where wars are now being fought online and technology and information is being weaponized by both or multiple parties to further their own agenda. In this timely manner, today is the 14th of April. It's a festive season in almost all religions that are present in India as well as worldwide. It's the Jewish festival of Pesach is shortly to be celebrated. We're in the month of Ramadan, which is very auspicious for the Muslims. We celebrate New Year in Tamil Nadu, in Sri Lanka, and several South Indian states. We're in the middle of Navratri and Ram Navami. So we're also today celebrating the birth anniversary of one of the chief architects of India's constitution, Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar. And as he very importantly said, a constitution is as strong as those who implement it. Today, we have a panel of policymakers, thinkers, and diplomats who will discuss what is the politics of the future in this era of social media and the internet. Starting off, I'd like to thank our co-hosts, ICCR and the Fondazione Luigi Einaudi. I'd like to thank our media partners, Chitti Media, who've put in a lot of effort to make this session possible. I'd like to introduce Mr. S. Narendran, a senior and a very eminent public policy expert from India, to introduce today's session. Mr. Narendran. You're still mute, sir.
Thank you very much, boss. And I thank all the participants and the audience for taking time off to be present here for this very important aspect impacting human endeavor, the democracy of the future. So I think like Vas introduced himself and said about the social media and the digital revolution which takes place. We have our IT minister from India as co-panelist, but India has crossed 500 million active social media users who spend 2.5 hours a day going about their lives, talking to friends and going about their transactions and working, etc. So worldwide, the total population of active social media users has crossed 1.5 billion. It is growing by the hour, and we are seeing unprecedented times which centuries have not seen, where the people's voice and what their needs, wants, desires, expectations are available online and real time. So hence the fundamental question of what is the future of democracy. The issues of people's representative process of policy making, what we have witnessed for centuries, in some sense is under siege. With available such large voices of people available in real time, can we do something transformationally better for the future of democracy? That's the fundamental questions. Another important aspect is the social media platforms are also monopolistic and for profit, which means they could be subject to bias, prejudices, and they can have sponsors. So policymakers from across left, right, center are all equally concerned about the power those platforms and those technology platforms have today. So how do we marry this? We have seen several experiments, especially in Europe to a very large extent, of legislating and trying to legislate and come social media under policy control. But I think that's just an experiment, but that's not the solution. So, but more importantly than the platforms, the availability of people's real-time voice across billions of peoples all across the world, that technology is going to transform the democracy of the future. The other aspect which I expect many of you policymakers to talk about is also centuries of democracy. What has it taught us? What are the fundamental essence of the learnings of centuries of democracy? And democracy is also revolved across various countries all across. So what does it mean? Hence, what is the democracy of the future? In India, there was another survey, I'm sure it is true with many other countries. 12 to 15% of the population of social media users have anything to do with politics. A large majority of them, 85 to probably 90%, have got very little to do with politics. They go about their lives, they want to educate themselves, they're raising families, they're entertaining themselves, learning themselves, doing their work and going about it. So, so when you look at the large population of people, and if we have a method of assimilating by a magic wand to understand what their vision or aspiration of a nation and their vision for India, I'm just using India, it's true to every country across the world. If we understand people's voices as to what is their vision of their country, the policy making will look completely very different. It's in some sense flipping the side completely the opposite way. So these are all challenges today, and we are here together. This is a very small initiative to think about the future of democracy, learn from our centuries of evolution of democracy, and come to terms with this metamorphic disruption using the social media, and hence what is the future. These are two essential aspects. And the last point is also to see, can we look at policy making, flip the side? Can we look at what people want the vision of their country to be, rather than people's representatives going to them and say, this is what I wish to deliver for you. Today, it is possible in real-time basis. So that is the whole essence of this meeting. We are going to do a series of discussions from various policymakers, public intellectuals from across the world, and have multiple dialogues. And eventually, we believe that the seeds we sow in today will contribute in a major way in how the democracy looks when our children and grandchildren will look at it. So I just remembered there is a very famous Indian philosopher called Swami Vivekananda. There's a story in which he said he was walking down the beach sometime and he saw hundreds of turtles trapped on the soil while the water was receding during low tide. So this wise man was thinking about how to solve this problem where millions of turtles' lives could be saved. And then he suddenly saw an old man walking past. He was picking up a turtle one at a time, running to the water and throwing it back. So this wise man stopped him and asked him, what difference are you going to make? Because there are millions of them. This old person never stopped. He kept doing this, and as every turtle he picked up, he said, I've made a difference to this guy. I made a difference to this guy. I've made a difference to this guy. So this initiative is something about that. We just picked up these issues amongst innumerable problems of human endeavor, and we want to see how we can try and solve this. So I thank all of you for taking time off, and I hope we have a great session, and look forward to taking this many, many miles forward. I thank you very much. I would like to get Dr. Vinay's Sahasrabuddhe's speech. He had to go urgently. He's right now on a flight. So he has recorded his speech this morning itself. So, Dr. Vinay Sahasrabuddhe is the chairman of Indian Center for Cultural Relations and the Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India. He's a great thought leader. He's been a great student of democracy and policy making. And ICCR is also a host for this program. So I request admin to please play Dr. Vinay Sahasrabuddhe's speech. Thank you very much.
Namaste and greetings to all. Today is 14th of April, which is the birth anniversary of Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar, one of the principal architects of India's constitution. And Indian constitution is in a way a manifesto of democracy. In a way, it underscores India's civilizational values, of which democracy is an important ingredient. And not just democracy, but humanity, fraternity, rule of law, liberty, and all these things are a part of India's civilizational values and thereby India's culture. And therefore, democracy is not something which came here in India from somewhere. Democracy is the part of the lifeblood of India. India and democracy, in a way, are synonymous. And therefore, when we discuss about the future of democracy and the politics of future, at the outset, let me congratulate Sakshi, the Commonwealth unit, and all the organizations who have decided to come together to organize this webinar. Congratulations. Insofar as my approach and my assessment of this particular theme, which is the future of democracy and the politics of the future, is concerned, I believe that the Abraham Lincoln's description of government and description, or rather definition of democracy, which is the government of the people, for the people and by the people, holds relevance today, but I would like to underscore the middle part of it, which is for the people. Meaning that democracy eventually will have to deliver and ensure that democracy makes a difference. Ensure that people feel like democracy is making a difference. If people do not feel that democracy has brought in some positive changes in their lives, have in a way brought in some ease in their otherwise very struggling and tiring kind of life, I believe democracy and the popular commitment to democracy unfortunately will get diluted. People are happy about democracy because they get a voice. But beyond that, if they don't realize and if it doesn't become a part of their experience that democracy brings in some ease of life into their day-to-day living, their confidence in the idea of democracy, I am afraid, will evaporate. And therefore, the challenge before democracy is to ensure that democracy delivers effectively, brings in an element of ease of life, and thereby becomes a vehicle for transformation of the people at large. I understand that many researchers in democracy have reflected on this particular challenge quite elaborately. And one researcher particularly, Dr. P. Norris, of the Kennedy School of Government, has come out with a new theory which she labeled as unified theory, wherein she proposes that mere liberal democracy is not enough. Liberal democracy is important, and people in a democratic country will have to ensure that the democracy becomes a part of their liberal worldview. But beyond that, all these elements of liberal democracy will have to be complemented by what Pippa Norris describes as state efficiency. And therefore, a strong state, an effective state, a result-oriented administration is something which is the need of the hour. To that end, politicians will have to sharpen their skills, because they will have to realize that being popular, they are elected, and popularity is their passport to any electoral position. But although popularity is important in any democracy, because popularity gives you the mandate, popularity alone is not enough. People who are dear to the electorate will also have to ensure that they become effective administrators. If they fail in that, the very confidence of the people in the idea of democracy, I am afraid, will get shattered. And therefore, the future of democracy hinges upon how effectively we convert popular democracy into an effective democracy. I believe this is the challenge, and in a way, this is the message for all those who think about politics of the future. Effective democracy. I believe this is the challenge, and in a way, this is the message for all those who think about politics of the future. Effective democracy. I believe this is the challenge, and in a way, this is the message for all those who think about politics of the future.
Thank you so much for that message to Dr. Sahasrabuddhe. And thank you so much, Narendra ji, for your kind words. Let me introduce our keynote speaker today. Ambassador Dr. Dore Gold is the president of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, which is one of Israel's primary think tanks. Ambassador Gold has also been the Director General of the Israeli Ministry for Foreign Affairs, as well as a career diplomat who has represented Israel in several key postings. He's also advised the Prime Minister during his tenure in government. Ambassador Gold.
Thank you. I think the timing of this conference couldn't be better, because we are at a very difficult time in contemporary history. Democracy can never be taken for granted. And today, democracy is under assault. I think if we had spoken to the people who are following this conference a year ago, no one would have imagined a war occurring in Europe on the scale of what we're seeing in the Ukraine. And the war in the Ukraine tells us that countries that are seeking to build democratic foundations are going to find themselves at certain times, under an assault. And they may have to actually defend their democracy, something that we haven't heard of in a long time, but it is occurring today. I don't want to get into the politics of that war between Russia and the Ukraine. But it is a kind of warning sign to all of us that democracies can face even a military assault. And it's something which I think has us all very unnerved. Democracies can create a club of countries, a group of countries that identify with each other. When NATO was formed, 1945, the countries behind it were democratic countries. They had, in each in their own way, fought off the threat of the fascist grouping. They fought Nazi Germany, they fought Italy, and now they were coming together to work together in a united fashion. I think that's what's going to have to happen in the future. We shouldn't forget the lessons of the Second World War. In Israel, we certainly have not. So I believe that democracy is of supreme value, and it's something which we should teach our populations to treasure. And the state of Israel, like India, comes from ancient roots. And those ancient roots give us special appreciation for democracy and for the need to protect democracy. It would be useful if after this conference, and perhaps other conferences that it might generate, we reach an understanding of how the democratic countries can reinforce each other and form a new grouping of countries that ultimately provide for each other's protection, so that democracy is the glue for that grouping of countries in the future. And that is why what we are discussing today is so important. I will turn the floor back to the organizers of the conference, and I thank you for turning to me and bringing in Israel as a partner in this effort. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Gold, and thank all the best wishes for Pesach, which you start very soon, along with all the other Indian festivals that are ongoing. So thank you for making the time and joining us today. Now we hear from His Excellency Rajiv Chandrasekhar, who's our dynamic Minister of State for Skill Development and Entrepreneurship at the Government of India. His Excellency Chandrasekhar is a very big thinker when it comes to digital democracy, as well as the architect of any future laws in India on the digital field. So, Chandrasekhar, the floor is yours.
So thank you. First of all, let me join the other panelists in thanking you for inviting me to speak this evening, my time, and I'm assuming it is a slightly different time from where most of you are. But thank you, and thank you also for having this conversation. I think this is as Ambassador Gold mentioned, I think this is a conversation that needs to be had, and hopefully not just episodic, but a conversation that is durable and sustained. Look, I don't claim to be a scholar of democracies, but I clearly know that I am a citizen in a very vibrant democracy. I've experienced democracy for almost all of my life. And I completely agree with Ambassador Gold when he says that in today's world, we should not take this democracy for granted. And the corollary of that in some ways is that it's not just enough to wish for a democracy, to get democracy. And democracies that we have today are worth understanding and defending. And understanding, I mean, in the context of what the new threats to our democracy are. I also do agree with Ambassador Gold's proposition that there is a need for a more durable, sustained engagement between democracies of the world. And that this engagement of democracies is again not episodic, not tactical, not based on an event in your backyard or some geopolitical construct that emerges and sets the sun rises one day and sets the other day. I think this conversation about a sustained alliance, durable alliance of like-minded, like-thinking countries and democracies is an absolute need of the hour in terms of all of the challenges that democracies face. I know you've invited me here to speak about the challenges that technology poses to democracies, and I will restrict my next 3-4 minutes or 5 minutes on that. For countries like India, technology has played a big role in altering the narrative of democracy. And I say this in the context of, for many decades, India was seen as this dysfunctional democracy where money sent from Delhi did not reach the beneficiaries. Famously, in the late 80s, there was a prime minister that His Excellency the Governor Arif Mohammed will remember, said that out of every 100 rupees that goes from New Delhi, only 10 or 15 rupees reach the beneficiary. Then there was this other narrative about this democracies being dysfunctional, which is that we never had tax compliance, tax revenues in a country like India would never catch up with the requirements of a nation that was or meet its ambitions for development and investment. And the third was that in a lot of ways, large democracies like India were unwieldy, government was far away from citizens, and therefore there was almost embedded in the narrative of democracies the irresponsive or unresponsive governments. If you look at those three aspects that characterize the Indian democracy in particular, and democracies, large democracies in general, for many, many decades, it is technology and the use of technology by Prime Minister Modi, starting from 2014, that has turned that narrative on its head. Governance today, benefits, subsidies go to between the government and the state capital or the central capital to a beneficiary overnight, without any leakage, without any corruption, and an absolute bullet-fired type of a mechanism. The responsiveness of a government today has been completely increased significantly by the way technologies connect government and citizen. And we have today India emerging out of COVID. This is a tremendous piece of data that I'll give you. A country that had a target of $300 billion of tax collection is today out there talking about a 25% excess, overperformance on tax revenues at 375 billion. Again, helped by technology. So I want to make the one point that technology is a great enabler for democracies. I wanted to just make that point with 3 examples. But it is clear with the way that the internet has been now broken up or reorganized from the utopia that we believed it was into this big splinter net dominated by these big tech platforms, that there is a new challenge for democracies. The challenges come from the monopolies and the power of these big tech platforms, the user harm that is being coming as a consequence of that, biases, and artificial intelligence-led kind of corporate biases that are driving the narrative in one direction or the other direction online, and fake news and the openness of these platforms. So I just want to lay this out for you that as much as technology is benefiting democracies, there is a need for countries around the world, especially democracies around the world, to start thinking about these downside risks that these platforms represent. There is a research study that came out recently that was quoted by Milken Institute that says fake news travels, the velocity of fake news is 6 to 7 times faster than the truth. Now, if you have a platform and you have these multiple platforms that almost dominate the internet and lend themselves very willingly or unwittingly to be weaponized against particular classes of people, communities, or countries, then we are talking about really a reason for us all to be deeply concerned about how our democracies can deal with this type of challenge. And I have a limited amount of time. I realize that. I'll just end by saying the following. Technology is good. I have lived all my life working on technology. There is tremendous amount of good that can come out of technology. But for those who want to protect our precious democracies, we need to look at the flip side of technology very, very carefully, create a global partnership and almost like a global regulatory agreement that says that while the good of the technology must be exploited for all our citizens, the bad of the technology, the risks of the technology, especially these emerging technologies like AI and many other things, need to be carefully regulated, carefully understood, and not as some binary between regulation and free speech, but really about addressing the strength and strengthening our democracy and the reach of democracy to every citizen. I will end there. This is a topic that is worth speaking about for hours and hours, and I hope the organizers will consider having many such follow-up discussions. Thank you again for the opportunity, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Your Excellency. That was His Excellency Rajiv Chandrasekhar, Minister of State for Skill Development, who raised a very valid point of the weaponization of internet against democracies in general, which needs to be weighed very carefully with the advantages of technology, especially in a democracy like India, which by 2030 will have 1/3 of its citizens between 15 and 35 years of age, and therefore living most of their time in the virtual world. A quick slight change in the order of speakers so that we can get a British perspective. His Excellency, the Honorable Nirj Deva, is a politician, a thinker, a former member of the European Parliament. We'd definitely like your point of view on what His Excellency just said. You're still mute, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm very conscious that Lord Marland has to leave early. Is that all right, Jonathan, if I speak now? Right. I'm very grateful for the organizers for bringing all us together. Not as Ambassador Gold said, it is hugely timely that we have created this opportunity to discuss. I hope one of many in a series of discussions about democracy. And we are talking about democracy at a critical time in human history. Democracy is not something that is a given. It is a price that is achieved by a whole series of values that underpin it. And authoritarianism and totalitarianism is a much easier construct that throughout human history, if you look at the period of civilized history, democracy has been alive and present for a fraction of the time when the world, by and large, from the pharaohs to the Babylonians and so on, lived under what is totalitarianism, authoritarianism, or imperialism. Whatever ism it is, it was not democracy. Democracy actually came into being, as we all know, when noisy Greek states and the Indian cultures, as the Honorable Speaker earlier said, all had a say in how one was governing oneself. But the fundamental point, in my view, of where democracy took off like a rocket to the moon was the understanding of a unique moment in our history when the ruler agreed to live by the same laws as his subjects. That moment, which we in England call the Magna Carta, changed the perception of governance forever. It might be amusing for you to know that in Europe, that idea has still not taken root. the lawmakers are immune from the laws that they make. And for 20 years, I was immune from the laws that I made in the European Parliament. I had special immunity to live under a different set of laws. So we need to understand that the value of democracy, it comes from a set system of values. And the system of values is underpinned by the rule of law and the fact that the law and the lawmakers are under the same laws as everyone else. Unfortunately, in the developing countries, in many parts of Asia, I know for a fact that the lawmakers can get away with it. They don't get arrested for speeding. They don't get arrested for drunken driving. They don't get arrested for any of some misdemeanor because they are the lawmakers. Whereas in England, we've now had this rather comical situation, which I think is rather comical, of the Prime Minister being fined for having a party in his own house by the police. That is, in effect, the best example of democracy, of the rule of law and the wish of the will of the people being enacted, even if it is the Prime Minister. To protect that is a very important and delicate issue. We see the war in the Ukraine, as I see the war in the Ukraine, as Ambassador Gold saw the war in the Ukraine and sees the war in the Ukraine, as a war between forces of democracy and forces of authoritarianism. And if you look at the world recently more and more, the forces of authoritarianism are entrenching and becoming stronger. And if you look at the map of the world and see which parts of the world are democratic, curiously, the British left toe of the Commonwealth, if I say that, the Commonwealth has retained its democratic roots. I'm so proud that we are talking about this in the world's largest democracy. And for years, I've been encouraging my Indian friends to promote democracy around the world, because that is one of the most extraordinary powers you have. And this conference is the beginning, I hope, of an Indian attempt to promote democratic values and democracy throughout the world in the face of authoritarianism, communism, call it what you like, which imprisons people and entrenches them into a system of order where their own free will is destroyed. But as some of the speakers said today, democracy itself faces extraordinary dangers. I have often thought about this idea of representative democracy, having been elected for over 30 years, where people have elected me to look after their interests in a parliament. Now, this is the Burkean system. The Honorable Minister has been elected, was elected from Karnataka, or an MP is elected from Kerala to go to Delhi and look after their interests for 4 or 5 years, and then come back and be re-elected again or not. But this idea that our electors are incapable of making decisions in that period and leave it all to us to decide what is good for them, I think is now being challenged by social media. And if there's one thing that social media has done, and I realized that as much as recent as 2016, when I found that my electorate knew about the subject I was dealing with in Parliament equally well as I did, because they had access to the internet, social media, commentaries, and so on. So to treat our electors as people who just trust us to do the best for them, I think that is for the birds. Our electors know equally well what is best for them every day. And the question is, how we then tie them up into that decision-making process without going into what the Swiss have, a perpetual referendum. It may be that there will come a time when members of parliament are not necessary because the electorate can decide which laws to pass through referendum because they are totally exposed to social media and information. I don't know, and I'm not encouraging that idea at all because it can be very dangerous. And certain things can come which are not expected. But there is certainly a growing gap between this notion that you elect me for 5 years and I'll do my best for you idea. That's not on anymore. It needs much more coherent consolidation and intercommunication between the elector and the representative. How we do that requires a certain amount of technological challenge. The minister, His Excellency the Minister raised another interesting point about artificial intelligence. With AI and blockchains, the ability to create transparency and then make decisions automatically without people being involved becomes extremely dangerous. And therefore, decisions will be made automatically without even the responsible officials knowing what's going on. And then there will be backlashes because there's no accountability as to why those decisions were made. Finally, I just want to leave a thought behind. Ambassador Gould talked about a new group. I think the time is absolutely right to create a grouping of democracies. Assembly of democracies, whatever you want to call it. And within it, I would like to posit the Commonwealth as a major player because by and large, the Commonwealth of 54 countries are all democracies. In different shades, certainly. If you have rankings, there are some that are performing very well, and that leads to the view that was expressed earlier about governance. Governance matters a great deal in democracy. But within the 54 countries of the Commonwealth, democracy does function at different levels or degrees, and that needs to be strengthened. And I now plead with my Indian friends, lead the Commonwealth. It is 2.4 billion people. It makes the Belt and Road look like a cattle truck. 2.4 billion people speaking governance systems with the same laws, communicating in the same language. It's there. Pick it up and run with it. And finally, a note of warning. Our young people are leaving our world and starting to live in something called the metaverse. They're creating an imaginary world with imaginary buildings, imaginary streets, imaginary everything. And they're putting this thing on their heads, and they're going to spend a lot of time in this new world. The other day, someone rang me and said, would I like to buy a billboard on the metaverse to advertise my product? And I said, what? They're selling billboards in the metaverse. And they wanted to know whether I would want to have Commonwealth Union publication advertised in the metaverse. I just was totally speechless. But that's where the world is moving to. So, gentlemen, ladies who are listening to this, thank you for this opportunity to express my views.
Thank you very much, Honorable Deva, and your suggestions are well taken by, I hope they're well taken by the decision makers of the world's largest democracy. I would request, if it's not a problem for Governor Khan, Lord Marland needs to leave a little earlier due to some personal commitments. Would it be okay, sir, if I let Lord Marland speak first before you?
Oh, no problem. No problem.
Thank you so much, Alan. Thank you for understanding. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Baron Jonathan Marland, the chairman of the Commonwealth Enterprise and Investment Council. Baron Marland.
Well, thank you. And what a fascinating and apposite event this is. It couldn't come at a more critical time. Of course, to many, and this is nothing of what I say, by the way, is a criticism, it's an observation for all of us. To many, democracy is already dying. If you look around the world, people feel they've been badly led. We've lurched from crisis to crisis. The recent crisis, of course, was COVID. The crisis before that was the financial crisis. We have massive future crises, and there seemingly has been rather a lack of leadership, if you talk across the world, as I do frequently. Democracy has forced governments into short-term decisions because they stand for election every 4 or 5 years and cannot make long-term decisions because they have put themselves to the electorate. And we're going to see this in the energy crisis that's about to happen, where short-term decisions have been made where they need in energy to be long-term. We've also failed to act as a democratic group of nations. We've allowed to sleep on our watch as China has inexorably developed, as Deva said, the One Belt, One Road program, has put massive investments in a lot of countries throughout the world, strategic positions, and we have not created funding that has challenged the Chinese endeavor. And to many, democracy has become a talking shop rather than a doing shop, if you'll excuse that language. So I think democracy is under great challenge before Ukraine. And Ukraine now has shaken it to the rafters. And the fallout will be very interesting to watch. I think nations believe that Russia would roll into Ukraine, that Ukraine would fall very quickly, but to everyone's surprise, perhaps not to the Ukrainians, they have fought like tigers and have repelled in some cases the Russian initiative and have demanded of the West and democratic nations support. And this support has been mixed for various self-interest reasons. And as I say, this is not a criticism, it is an observation. Countries do things for different reasons. But there has not clearly been a universal alignment in support of Ukraine. As we have seen, Britain, the United States, and France to a certain extent, and a number of European countries have been very vehement in their support, as have Australia, New Zealand, etc., Canada. But Germany has been slow to turn off the taps of its gas pipelines and its dependency on Russia for its energy. Clearly, Brazil, India, South Africa, Pakistan, and a number of other countries have decided that they're not going to, that they're going to remain at best neutral, but in some ways more positive towards the Russian movement. And of course, China has continued its support of Russia. So I think this is a critical time. And at the end of it, we will almost certainly ask ourselves the questions is, what is the point of G7? What is the point of G20? What is the point of the United Nations? What is the point of the Commonwealth? And what is the point of democracy if, when democracy is trying to be overrun by an undemocratic nation, if we don't align to support it and uphold the democracy, the democratic principles, where does this world go? And it therefore begs the question is, who is going to uphold the rule of law and the rule of global law? Who is going to be the world's police force, which to date America have tended to be with the support of most democratic countries, and what is going to be the order that forms as a result of it. And of course, India plays a very, very pivotal role in this. It is the second most populated nation in the world. It is an innovative, entrepreneurial country, which is a democratic nation, but is going to have to come, as Mr. Deva said, to the forefront of some of these institutions and show real leadership if democracy is going to survive, and is going to have to support the democratic ideal in a more positive way than perhaps people may think. And as I say, this is not a criticism, this is just what people are thinking throughout the world. I personally do not have any argument with India, please, if you thought I did. So with that, and his rather hard-hitting words, I'm afraid the clock has ticked to a point where you can't throw hand grenades at me if I leave the room. But thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a really terrific to hear such erudite people speaking on this subject. And I'm sorry to perhaps be less erudite than them, but nonetheless state a case.
Thank you, Lord Marland, and thank you for going straight to the point. Proves that you are a successful business person as well as a politician. So thank you for making the time, sir, and thank you for joining us today. I'd now like to call upon arguably one of India's senior most policymakers and well-known politicians, who currently is the governor of the state of Kerala, which is India's most literate state, so therefore probably the state which uses the most internet. So his job, he has an unenviable job of being the man at the top. So without much ado, His Excellency Arif Mohammed Khan, the Governor of Kerala. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be part of this conference and listen to such erudite people. The subject which has been given for this event, I do not claim any expertise on that subject. Therefore, the safe bet for me is to associate with whatever has been said by my colleague, Shri Rajiv Chandrasekhar, who is minister, who is not only minister in the central government, but he can be considered as an expert of the subject. Therefore, instead of dwelling on the technicalities, I will come to the point where concern is being expressed by many people about the future of democracy, taking into consideration the disruptive forces which have been released or which have come, which are posing danger to the functioning of the democracy. This technology, the technology we are not just talking about the technology which came into existence few decades back. We are talking about the technology which is in the offing. I was listening to a very prominent scientist, one of his recent speech, where he has said that next 5 years are going to be extremely crucial, and the life after 5 years or 10 years, it will become so different from the life which we are living today. And we have, if we look at the history, then we see that anything new, any innovation, anything new which comes as a result of new research is striving that always creates jitters because it forces people to move out of the comfortable zone of their habits. And the idea that anything new that comes will necessarily kill something else is an old idea and has caused a lot of consternation to many generations in the past who came to face with new ideas and innovations. And here what I find, several examples can be given. But what I find of utmost importance and very interesting is the Hugo's Hunchback of Notre Dame, Frollo, comparing a book with his old cathedral, says, Sesi Tiura Sela, which means the book will kill the cathedral and the alphabet will kill the image. According to Plato, Thute or Hermes, who is acknowledged to be the inventor of the syllables, when he put everything into order and with great sense of pride, he presented his product to Pharaoh, claiming that this new technique which has been developed by him will allow human beings to remember what they would otherwise forget. Thute was very happy, but Pharaoh was not pleased. Pharaoh said, "My skillful Thute, memory is a great gift that ought to be kept alive by training it continuously. With your invention, people will not be obliged any longer to train memory. They will remember things not because of an internal effort, but by mere virtue of an external device." I have given this example only to show that now that we are face to face with the new instruments and devices based on artificial intelligence, many of us are feeling uncomfortable. Many of us are seeing a threat there. My point is that you give any instrument in the hand of man, any instrument, it can be a blessing, it can be used for what in India we say lok sangrah, for the general good, and the same instrument can be used for destructive purposes. Therefore, I feel that there is no need to be fearful, to be scared of the new technology. What we need to do is to create the mindset, to create the minds which will use it for beneficial and productive purposes. And this is no ordinary task. Possibly, the invention of artificial intelligence is not as difficult as to train minds and create awareness how to treat fellow human beings. And here I would like to quote what Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore in May 1926, while accepting the Nobel Peace Prize, he invoked two lines from Upanishad, an Upanishadic idea, to show, or rather to convey, the kind of world that he wants to see, the kind of world order. And he said, Yastu sarvani bhutani atmanye vanu pashyati sarva bhuteshu chatmanam Tatona Viju Gupta se. He says, one who perceives all beings in his own self and own self in all beings, one who develops this thinking, one who develops this mindset, then for him no space, no room is left to harbor any feelings of aversion or even indifference. He can never step on the shoes or the feet of the other person. But this can come only when this mind is trained like this. And if mind is not trained on these lines, then what happens? Saksharo vipri tatve rakshaso bhavati dhurvam. If you are learned, you are educated, you are competent, but you lack basic values of compassion and empathy, when you refuse to put yourself in the shoes of the other person, then you develop intellectual arrogance. Then you are likely to do things which will affect others adversely. Since we have very little time, and I think one minute is left, therefore I would like to commend some of the previous speakers have spoken about Ukraine. And point has been made that India is behaving in a neutral manner. No, certainly not. We are not neutral. We want to be in a position when all other options have been exhausted and somebody is needed to build the bridge for peace, to bring the warring parties to on the same table. Let there be somebody in the world who can play that role. India is not neutral. India is only trying to maintain its position where it can actively work for peace, where we can promote peace. We want to be in that position because our old experience tells us, history tells us that people, when they have exhausted all other options, they start listening to reason. They start working on logical and rational lines. So we are only trying to maintain that position where we can play that role, hopefully sometime very near in future. And thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share my ideas with others. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Governor Sahab. You have underlined the spirit of the Indian Constitution. You have underlined Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Thank you so much. Your words of wisdom, I'm sure, are come from your vast experience, but I think it was absolutely needed as a part of today's discussion. So thank you. Our next speaker is a member of Parliament, a member of Rajya Sabha from India. I would ask the Honorable Sasmit Patra to say a few words.
Thank you, Honorable Excellency. Namaskar. Namaskar to everyone. I have 5 minutes and I'll try to be as brief as possible. And firstly, thank you so much for inviting me to this extremely important and extremely interesting talk and conference this evening. Today, in fact, when we are sitting together, happens to be the birth anniversary of Baba Saheb Ambedkar, the architect of India's constitution. And I just wanted to start by just borrowing the first 3 words of the Indian Constitution and the preamble of the Indian Constitution, which says, "We the people." These are 3 words. We the people give to ourselves. So if we talk about democracy and we are talking about the future of democracy, it starts with people, it ends with people. And the Indian Constitution and its preamble itself has been given by we the people to ourselves. So that's the first part about democracy, people. The second part of the preamble, and I just want to borrow 4 pillars. The first pillar, justice. Second pillar, liberty. Third pillar, equality. Fourth pillar, fraternity. And I believe if any democracy wants to test its democracy as a litmus test, it must look at these 4 pillars and see how far they are serving, they are ensuring to their citizens. If they are unable to ensure, they are less of a democracy. If they are able to ensure, they're more of a democracy. So these litmus test has already been provided for in the Indian Constitution, and that truly resembles where Indian democracy is today. I was just listening to the speakers, and of course, after His Excellency, Honorable Governor has already made the point on India's position relating to the issue about Ukraine, I would like to also mention about another aspect about how Indian democracy has matured and how a mature democracy deals with the global world. Recently, our Foreign Minister, our External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, was asked during his briefing with Mr. Bilkin that, you are actually buying oil from Russia. The answer was so matured, and that only comes from a mature democracy, when the foreign minister said, what we buy in a month, Europe does in an afternoon. I think that truly resembles the reality of a mature democracy. We are assertive, we are clear, we know where we are going, and we're not shy about talking about democratic values. Unfortunately, the narratives that are being spun around are so lopsided today in the international world that the Indian democracy fabric is sometimes being questioned, which is hilarious in my view. I do not come from the Bharatiya Janata Party, which happens to be the ruling party of the government. I happen to be from an opposition party, the Biju Janata Dal. But when we sit in the parliament, and as the largest democracy of the world, when we debate and discuss, the idea of a democracy truly germinates when we all come to a consensus. We may have ideological differences. We may have conflicts in terms of our ideas, but then we all agree to disagree, but we also agree to work together to a consensus. That truly is the spirit of democracy. That truly is the spirit of India. And I will just conclude by talking about one last aspect where, my senior colleague and elder brother, Shri Rajiv Chandrasekhar ji also spoke about the need to create more areas and avenues and platforms of engagement. And there is one such platform, which is the Inter-Parliamentary Union. It is a platform of more than 180 parliaments across the world. India is one of the leading partners. I'm a member of one of their committees, and from the parliament have been privileged to attend quite a few conferences. I believe Inter-Parliamentary Union, when it represents all the parliaments, and the parliaments itself represents democracy, we should strengthen Inter-Parliamentary Union and should also create such parliamentary unions within the Southeast Asia, the South Asia, and different other zones that we want to. Discussion, debate, dialogue will only lead to greater democracy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, Patraji, and it's Panasankranti in your native Orissa, so greetings from all of us. Thank you for making the time on this auspicious day to join us and share your thoughts with us. Thank you so much, sir. We will next play a recorded message from Ambassador Giulio Terzi di Sant'Agatha, Italy's former Minister of Foreign Affairs, as well as a key Italian diplomat during an exceptional service with the Italian Foreign Ministry. Unfortunately, Ambassador Terzi couldn't join us, but he did record a message for us. If you could please play the message. Thank you.
Excellencies, honorable guests and speakers to this important debate, I would like, first of all, to express my sincerest congratulations, also on behalf of the Luigi Einaudi Foundation, to the Indian Council of Cultural Relations, to the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, and to Sakshi Association for convening and organizing this discussion about the future of democracy and the policies we should foresee for our future. Being a member of a think tank deeply engaged in safeguarding human rights, liberty, and freedom, through the promotion of the rule of law and of liberal democracy, the Luigi Einaudi Foundation, you may not be surprised if my brief observations will focus on freedom.
freedoms in our nations as much as in all the states which are members of the UN family worldwide. Freedoms that can only be implemented in strict adherence with universal human rights and an emerging universal human right to know. The quest for truth, since it is the truth which always triumphs, not falsehood. Satya meva yayate is the inner force of every human being, whatever his culture and whatever his religion or belief. It is the force which erupts in the most dramatic turns of history. 24th February 2022, this year, the beginning of this year, is a watershed in the entire post-World War II international relations. First and foremost, that date should be considered, in my view, as the most important reference in a discussion about the future of democracy. That is to say, a discussion about politics for the future. The tragedy and the genocidal crimes which have been developing after the Russian aggression against the Ukrainian people are two similar repressions and aggressions that have marked the experience of generation before our one. All along the imperialistic colonizations of the past, all along the tragedies of World War II and the tragedies which have happened during the Cold War. The USSR and the Warsaw Pact did collapse only when the peoples of Eastern Europe, the peoples of Russia, peoples of Central Asia, could finally become aware of the immense wall of falsehood, disinformation, censorship that was keeping in power those communist leaderships. They were keeping in power those leaderships by preventing any opening to freedom, to reliable and independent media, and to the recognition that the human right to know is the fundamental pillar for the rule of law. In the case of the Russian aggression against Ukraine, an aggression in the heart of Europe, which threatens the entire European Union and NATO countries, the deterrence needs to be made credible, not only through sanctions and assistance to Kiev, but also and especially through a huge effort in the fight against Russian and Chinese falsehood, disinformation, and censorship. If President Putin's and President Xi Jinping's advocates, influencers, friends, and proxies, active even in our free democracies, will continue to be allowed to disseminate gross falsehood, shameful propaganda, and disinformation, the entire democratic process in our country will be deeply affected. Russian and Chinese cyber information warfare, for example, has proven to be a powerful tool in the manipulation of Western public opinion during American and European elections over the last years. Public opinions are made deeply confused by disinformation and interference strategies carried out by antagonistic powers which deploy vast resources and very sophisticated technologies in order to destabilize our free democracies. How could our citizens continue to support governments elected through free and fair elections in their effort to respond to aggressions against a sovereign country in the heart of Europe? And how could the European citizens continue to respond effectively to these challenges if Russian and Chinese disinformation and propaganda are not properly countered and stopped immediately? On Friday, 7th of April, the European Parliament, the legislative body which freely expresses the political vision and positions of all the people of the European Union, has adopted with 513 votes in favor and only 22 votes against a very important resolution which intends to contribute substantially to the way ahead. towards politics of the future aimed at the promotion of the rule of law and fundamental freedoms, especially against the background poisoned by falsehood and devious propaganda. Let me therefore conclude, Excellencies, dear friends, my short remarks with some quotes from that resolution. Some selected chapter of this very important and widely encompassing framework of decisions by the European Parliament, which have now been presented to the Commission and to the European Council. The first concept which has to be underlined in the resolution, I believe, is the condemnation in the strongest possible terms of the Russian Federation war of aggression against Ukraine. The second is the fact that the resolution and the European Parliament, through this resolution, underlines that the military aggression and invasion constitutes a serious violation of international law and many treaties and conventions in the system of the United Nations. The third point is the expression of outrage and indignation of the reported atrocities against the population, the human rights, bombing of hospitals, cities, civilians, even civilians engaged in escaping the terrible theater of war and trying to get away, to their safety. The third point reiterates that deliveries of weapons, I think it is very much a discussed and debated topic, but it has to be remembered as one important topic contained in the decision of the European Parliament. The European Parliament reiterates that deliveries of weapons must continue and be stepped up to allow Ukraine to effectively defend itself, according to the provisions of Article 51 of the UN Charter. And the last point, the Parliament calls on the Council, on the European Council, to impose further sanctions on public figures who are spreading aggressive propaganda in Russia in support of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. And through spreading propaganda, they are deeply engaged, these figures, these public figures in Russia, also to disinform, to put their censorship and disinformation in European countries and in other countries worldwide. Thank you very much for your attention, and have a successful meeting, a very positive deliberation for this important topic, which comes to the assessment and the promotion of truth and legality, rights, human rights in the world. Thank you. So, the assessment and the promotion of truth and legality, rights, human rights in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Terzi.
So, the assessment and the promotion.
And thank you very much, Ambassador Terzi. And thank you all for patiently listening to a recorded message. Our next speaker needs no introduction. Pandit Satish Sharma is a British Indian leader, as well as a scholar and a very learned man, and a scholar of Indic subjects. Panditji, namaskar. Thank you for making the time for us, and the floor is yours.
Pranamji, namaskar, and Om Guru Bhyo Namaha. Thank you first to Sakshi for convening this gathering, and also for Chitti Media to take the responsibility of providing the infrastructure to disseminate and broadcast this particular talk. It's vitally important. One of the terrible things about being sixth after some amazing speakers is that I've just been cancelling item by item as each of the wonderful points I'd hoped to bring to you were addressed. And so our watching audience will benefit from the fact that my delivery and contribution will be shorter than it otherwise would have been. But the other aspect is that it's left me with a few very pithy and possibly overly direct observations, which I would like to just contribute. So, as a dharmic spectator of everything that we've talked about, there are a few thoughts that sprang to mind. Firstly, we have a unique contribution to make. In our Rig Veda, there is an invocation, Asato Ma Sat Gamaya, and it's probably the world's first warning to be wary of fakery in all spheres. You know, we have fake news, we have fake this, we have fake that, and the authors of the Rig Veda, they recognized the damage that fakery can do to human civilization. And the solution they recommended was that we try and see beyond Nam Rup, the name and form of things, to the Tattva. What is it that's the essence of what is being considered? And so one of the speakers earlier submitted that we have centuries of democracy to be able to look back on. And my first thought was, is that really true? Is that Satya to be able to say we have centuries of democracy? You know, there is a famous saying that the commonly proliferated account of history is merely a dominant culture's justification of its own actions. And the idea of democracy, it strikes me, is very easy to sell. And it gives one a mandate, an enviable mandate, occasionally not earned. But the substance of democracy is very, very difficult to deliver. And so I thought I'd first scrutinize the degree to which many apparent democracies have actually manifested the tattva of what it is to be a democracy. And that tattva is very easily apparent in times of great difficulty. You know, when the pressures, when the values that define what democracy is are subjected to stress testing and difficulty, that's when we really see whether a democracy is fake or whether it's real. You know, we have, in a dharmic point of view, we have the understanding that a human being by nature is a good creation. We are good beings. We are not prone to violent, terrible things. We are born as manifestations of divinity. So we are inherently good. And that's really what's at the heart of the Latin expression, vox populi, vox deus, the voice of the people, is divinity expressing itself. You know, these are foundational observations upon which a democracy rests. You know, a monarchy denies this principle. A theocracy denies this principle. And both of them seize the authority to dictate. And that authority is appropriated in the hands of a few. So whenever power and authority is appropriated in the hands of a few, that's always a red flag, isn't it? A monarchy is a form of enslavement, a theocracy is a form of enslavement, both desiring to control the common man. And Solzhenitsyn, I think it was, who said unlimited power in the hands of limited people always leads to cruelty. We have just seen in Canada how quickly the will of the people seemed to evaporate overnight. Bank accounts being forcibly closed, freedom to be able to express protest suddenly being extinguished by the state. And yet Canada has always projected itself as a beacon of democracy. We have seen in the United Kingdom similar draconian developments. I remember protesting against the war against Iraq. The people marched in their millions to challenge the decision makers who said, no, we must go to war. And Sir Tony Blair, has now been rewarded with a knighthood for his services to the crown. So these sorts of red flags, to my mind, say, well, maybe we haven't yet experienced centuries of democracy. Maybe we have experienced performative democracies as opposed to substantive democracies. And so that was a thought that I was going to share and perhaps encourage people to explore. Freedom of speech, freedom of thought, and the dharmic contribution, which is freedom from fear. And nobody fears Hindus, nobody fears the indigenous people of Bharat. You know, that's why we've been so welcoming to everybody. But that gift, freedom of fear, freedom of thought, and freedom of speech, they are contributions that we as representatives of the First Nations have yet to contribute in a manner that it was acceptable to the Eurocentric world. You know, in Bharat, this notion that each of us is divine is an incredibly trusting notion, isn't it? It's a notion which says, don't confine people, don't corral people, don't shepherd people, don't direct forcibly the activities that human beings are going to engage in. Allow humanity to evolve in the manner in which we're programmed to do, and that's sufficient. And when I look at the current dispensation in Bharat, I'm sent messages saying, this is terrible, this isn't being done, that's not being done, the government should do this, the government should do that. And I always feel that from one point of view, what the government is doing is holding the space so that the people of Bharat can become more democratically engaged, so that they can contribute their will in how they wish their communities and their society to function. And we're seeing the fruits of that holding of empty space beginning to manifest. The manner in which people across the globe are seizing the gifts of technology to be able to assert their desires, to contribute their voice, is extraordinary. And Jiti Media, I recall its birth in Bharat with the support of the government of India. It's an event we held many years ago. It was a group of volunteers wanting to be able to have their voice heard. They seized technology, and now they've become a significant influencer. So from that point of view, the increasing engagement of the people in democratic policy making, I don't think it's ever been as great as it is now. And it's being it's being facilitated with a great deal of support and encouragement. That's a wonderful development. But equally, I can see that an increasingly engaged democratic population would be perceived as a threat to fake democracies. Fake democracies, perhaps monarchies and theocracies which are masquerading as fake democracies, they would struggle to be able to accommodate an incredibly well-engaged democratic population. This is a thought that might be worth considering. But this notion of technology being released into the hands of the great unwashed, I think that strikes fear into the heart of many people. And there are some caveats that really a dharmic perspective could offer guidance on. You know, in this world of duality, where there's artificial intelligence, there's also artificial stupidity. We have the capacity to enshrine the most irrational judgment making facility into silicon, and that's a worry. You know, recently we have seen what I would term digital colonialism, digital oppression. In the past, humanity's freedom of movement was confined by barbed wire and fences. We have just seen the use of these vaccine passports to digitally confine the freedom of people to move. That's a digital concentration camp. I've recently received a specification of a programmable digital currency, where the transactions that the currency could be used to engage in are themselves programmable. So you could decide, or whoever is controlling that element could decide what that population could and could not buy. It's being presented as a wonderful thing that a parent could actually give their child some funds, and the funds themselves would deny the child the opportunity to buy sweets. Now, isn't that a lovely way of projecting a transactional oppression, shall we say? So these are also happening, and it's the populations, I think, who are now saying, no, we're not happy with this. There is one last concluding thought I'd share, which does concern me, and that is the Eurocentric nature of these conversations. Eurocentricism is a denial of diversity, and it's a denial of global democracy. You know, from outside of the European sphere, we can stand and say we have witnessed Eurocentric wars plunge humanity into darkness which takes decades to recover from. And we're witnessing that rush to engage in yet another Eurocentric war with the same battle drums being beaten, the same non-democratic decisions being made. And I think, bearing that in mind, the position that Bharat has taken in saying, no, we will not dance to the drum beats of war that are being beaten. We will approach this from the point of view of a genuine diversity of opinion. And that's a contribution towards a global democratic voice. So all of those things taken into consideration, I'm actually very positive. I think there is a responsibility on the Eurocentric power structures to acknowledge that they must embrace a global diversity of opinion, of motivation, of principles, before they can then receive the mantle of saying, yes, we are the champions and the protectors of the principles of democracy. Bharat has a great contribution to make in this. And from my point of view, the future is very bright, and I'll be cheeky enough to say the future is orange. So thank you very much to everybody. And Jai Shri Ram, I look forward to future engagement.
Panditji, thank you so much, and thank you for invoking the Pavamana Abhyaroha, which you stole from me. So my thunder in concluding this has now been stolen, and I have to search for new words. But I sincerely hope now that you've invoked it, it brings peace for all. Our last but not the least speaker is one of our most experienced historians, Ravi Kumarji. And while history is the best teacher, I'd invite Ravi Kumarji, who is the voice of experience, to conclude today's work. Ravi Kumarji.
Thank you, Vas. Namaste and greetings to one and all. 2000 years ago, India and Greece gave the world science, mathematics, medicine, astronomy, town planning, and democracy. We should accept that the world will always remain multilingual, multi-religious, and multi-ethnic. We need democracy to thrive under these circumstances, so we need a new philosophy. Now it is once again India, the spiritual land of the world, that may show the way for future. India is one of the most pluralistic countries in the world. It has more than 22 national languages and more than 600 dialects. We have people from almost all religions of the world living peacefully and working together. Hence, Indian democracy has a lesson for the world. Democracy today is facing fresh challenges from modern digital technology. We are living in a new world order shaped by technology and social media. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram are defining the way we think. 4.5 billion people use social media worldwide. It is world's largest community. Websites and applications have disrupted all areas of our lives, including democracy. Technology may not address ethics and the purpose of life. Knowledge and science without love, compassion, and empathy can destroy democracy. Social media platforms are monopolistic, as Narendran said, monopolistic in nature and are made for profit. They bias and prejudice our thoughts and actions. So social media have great potential to conduct instant referendum on policy matters. All these go against the spirit of democracy, where discussions are more important. Man has capacity for justice, but also has inclinations for injustice. And in democracy, ignorance of one voter can impair the security of one and all. Hence, we need more and more dialogues on democracy. Every country has done some experiments on democracy. We should take the best of all the countries so that we have answers to all the questions that are now coming up. There's one more threat for democracy. 92% of world's currency transactions are done digitally. Only 8% are done in the physical cash. This means that wealth of the world of over $109 trillion is kept online digitally. Very soon, we may see web-based voting to elect our representatives. All these changes call for serious discussions to secure lasting freedom, peace, happiness of mankind. We in Pride of India believe that the world is one big family where service is joy. Pride of India is an initiative to take these dialogues forward. I congratulate all the organizers, especially Vas, Narendran, for initiating a dialogue on the most volatile subject undergoing disruptions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Raviji, and thank you for your support and your guidance. Before I conclude, I'd first of all like to wish everyone who's celebrating a festival today, the Indian Republic, which remembers Baba Saheb Ambedkar today on his birth anniversary. He was a man who believed in the power of the people, and left us with a legacy that we are truly proud of. I'd like to wish everyone in Israel and the Jewish world for Pesach, everyone from the Muslim and Islamic world for Ramadan, for almost half of India, including Orissa, Tamil Nadu. Some of us have celebrated our New Year 3 weeks ago. My family hails from Karnataka. I was born in Mumbai, so some of us celebrated it 3 weeks ago. Some of us are celebrating it today. So Happy New Year to all of you. And I do hope that this new year ahead, according to our Sanskritic pattern, it's supposed to be Shubhakrit this year. So whatever happens this year, we hope for all humanity is auspicious and brings us peace. Thank you very much, and have a great evening, and thank you for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nirj.